You're on, Steven.
Okay.
All right. I'll stop sharing my screen if you want to share yours.
Sure. All right. Share screen. You cannot start screen share while the other participant is sharing. Well,
Yep. Let me kill my screen. Share. I'll stop sharing my screen if you want to share yours. Whoa.
Sure.
Why am I getting feedback here? Yeah, hold on 1 second. Yeah, give me just 1 second.
Yep.
All right. Stop share. There you go.
All right. I tweaked. Can you see my screen now?
Yep.
Yeah, so I put the agenda sales pipeline quadrants overview because I think that's the first thing we're doing, right?
Actually, no, I cannot see your screen now.
Oh. Share with people in groups. What? Got it. So just
click the share screen button and pick your screen.
So it says add share with people in groups. So add. All right.
There should just on the bottom of your Zoom window, there should be in the dead middle of the at the bottom an icon for share screen.
Yeah, no, I do these things all the time. All right, share screen. Nothing still?
Nope.
Huh. Right.
Oh,
That better?
There we go.
Okay. All right. So I changed. I went with sales pipeline quadrants overview.
Okay.
Defining a prospect versus suspect, which will sort of be defined within that, but it's okay to call that out anyways. How to build, manage, and understand media metrics, and I put high level outreach best practices in case we get there. So I just tweaked that a little bit.
That's fine. We do have people joining already. Just a heads up.
Okay.
So yeah, if you want to go ahead and shift over to presentation mode on the title slide.
Okay.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to go on mute until right at the top of the hour, and then I'll handle the housekeeping and act as MC, and we'll get going.
Okay, great.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to give it just a couple of minutes for everybody to join, and then we'll begin. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. A few housekeeping items first. Can I get somebody to confirm they can hear me all right as well as see our screen? Cool. Thanks so much, everybody. All right, we are recording today's webinar. Following the webinar, we will send an email out tomorrow with a link to both the recording as well as the deck. If you have any follow-up for myself or Stephen, you can reply to that email. If you have any additional questions, want to get any more information about anything discussed in the webinar, any additional detail, you feel free to reply to that email whenever you get it. All right, I think that's housekeeping items done. Thanks everybody for joining us today. You're here for our webinar with Sales Intel and Coach Media, and we're going to talk about maximizing your revenue with sales pipeline quadrants. This is something that Coach Media has perfected over the years. So excited to have Stephen here. Stephen, if you want to move to the next slide, we'll make intros. Just hit space.
Yep, it's.
Or click on the screen, and then hit space. There we go. All right. So my name is Jason Hubbard. I'm Vice President of Partnerships and Alliances here at Sales Intel. And I'm excited to have Stephen here with us. He's founder and ad tech sales trainer and coach with Coach Media. Stephen, welcome, man.
Thanks, Jason. Welcome, and I hope everyone had a nice Labor Day weekend.
Yep. Well, cool. I'll let you take it away. We'll keep this informal and conversational, but excited to learn all about this.
That's great. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Our agenda or discussion overview for the day is going to consist of an overview of the sales pipeline quadrants, a double down on the definition of a prospect versus a suspect, a honest, true pipeline versus a pipe dream to ensure that your forecasting is accurate, understanding your metrics, your velocity of metrics for those that do outreach, and last but not least, one or two high-level best practices as it relates to outreach. Right? So one of the first two things that it takes for a salesperson to be great, of 10 things we believe, are their ability to manage their business or manage their territory and manage their time. The third thing, in case anybody's taking note and inventory, would be their ability to close for meetings. And so the sales pipeline quadrants were designed specifically, first and foremost, to helping salespeople manage their territory, manage their business. And obviously there's elements of time management, and there's an emphasis on meetings as a theme to the sales pipeline quadrants. Right, so let's spend time introducing this to make sure that everybody participating in this understands this overview. And for all the years I've done training, this is always a top 3 takeaway from our clients in terms of best practices, in terms of adoption, in terms of keeping our pipeline honest, right? So first and foremost, if you're in sales, it starts with the universe. And the universe is defined as pre-qualified opportunities that you would prioritize. Okay, so let's think about the universe. How do you develop the universe? What goes in the universe? Well, there's a couple of obvious ones. An inbound lead would go in the universe. A vertical that your company is successful with, that you're not doing business with, might go in the universe. You scored a referral for a future opportunity, that might go in the universe. So the step one in building and implementing and adopting these sales pipeline quadrants is you have to actually build your universe. Some salespeople, they're given their universe. Day one, it's here you go. And it varies relative to enterprise, mid-market, or small business. If you're enterprise, you might only have 8 in your universe. If you're mid-market, you might have 150 to 200. If you're small, you might have hundreds, if not thousands. Okay, but step one in building the sales pipeline quadrant is filling in your universe and then prioritizing who's number 1, who's number 2, who's number 17, who's number 33.
And Stephen, it sounds like whenever you're talking about universe, this is the universe specific to that rep, not necessarily the TAM for the entire company. Is that correct?
100% correct. That's the beauty of the sales pipeline quadrant. They are totally customized to the individual salesperson who's responsible, Jason, for managing up. We joke, Jason, it's everybody laughs. We joke that our goal at Coach Media is for salespeople to have a muted weekly or monthly business plan meeting with their boss, where their boss basically looks at this, nods their head, gives the seller a high five, and that's their entire, because everything in the pipeline quadrants, there's no questions. It's right in front of you.
That's right? Definitely a dream most reps I know.
Right. I mean, think about it. If you're a manager on this call, how many times are you doing a pipeline where you leave that meeting with your seller and you're like, that seller has no idea what they're talking about. If they could just deliver me something in 3 minutes or less, where it was like black and white, it would make my life easier. Then I could submit that up to the CEO, et cetera, right? So again, step one in building the sales pipeline quadrants, you've got to develop your universe, and equally as important, it has to be prioritized. Okay. Step two, and I call this the wild card quadrant, the suspect quadrant. The suspect is really simple. You're either working and promoting, and again, if you're taking notes on this, I want you to write the word promote. You're promoting somebody up from your universe, you're bringing them to a suspect, and the only bloody thing you're trying to do is score a meeting. We talk about at Coach Media, the meeting is the sale. When you get a meeting, you made a sale. That's the most excited you should ever be, is when you score a meeting or a follow-up meeting, because your client and prospect's most precious commodity is time, and they just gave it to you. Now, of course, in this virtual world, it's Zoom meetings, it's Hangouts, it's Meet, it's all that, but they're giving you their time. So again, a suspect is either somebody you've promoted up from your universe, and the only thing you're doing is you're starting your outreach cadence and you're just trying to score a meeting. Okay. Now, a popular question that we're asked in our training is that the only way somebody can become a suspect? And the answer to that is no. There are 2 other ways that somebody can become a suspect. One, let's say Jason was selling me, and Jason and I had a couple of meetings. And at the end of the second meeting, Jason asked me for a follow-up meeting, and I said, you know, why don't we just touch base in a couple of weeks? Okay. So for a short while, I was a prospect for Jason, bottom left quadrant, again, bottom left quadrant, a prospect, because he had a scheduled meeting with me. But all of a sudden, at the end of the second meeting, he does not have a follow-up meeting for whatever reason. And so now Jason has to make a decision. He either has to demote me back into being a suspect and work as hard as he can trying to get me scheduled again for a meeting, or he decides that right now I'm not a good opportunity and he double demotes me back into the universe. And he puts a little note, reach back out to Stephen P. at Coach Media in 90 days. Jason took inventory of the meeting we just had. It didn't go as well as he had hoped, and he's just going to give this a little bit of time off. Okay, so that's how fluid and how ever changing the sales pipeline quadrants are. In a day, there could be anywhere, again, if you're enterprise, mid-market, small business, there could be anywhere between 10, 15, 20, 25 ads, moves, and changes you're making to your sales pipeline quadrant. Okay, but in summary, and Jason, I'll move it over to you if you have a question. In summary, a suspect simply means I'm just trying to schedule a meeting.
No, it makes sense. A lot of this, especially in pushing for meetings and stuff like that, is at least for those of us that have a divvying up of duties between SDRs and AEs. A lot of this seems to be more applicable on the SDR side. Is that a good assessment?
Just the universe and suspect quadrant is correct, because the SDR, BDR, they work the universe, Jason, and everybody listening. They're the ones that get that initial meeting because they're working their suspects, trying to get those what we call net new meetings. Okay, I scored a meeting. So now you move it from a suspect to a prospect. So let me just transition there, Jason, for a second. So everybody on the call, you cannot, I repeat, you cannot call somebody a prospect unless you have a scheduled meeting. So now you have a scheduled meeting. Now the account executive takes over. And in a lot of SaaS models, they're doing the demo. And now the account executive either gets the follow-up meeting or they don't. And if they get the follow-up meeting, Jason, they keep it as a prospect. And you'll note, everybody on the call, down below a prospect are just the classic stages of the sales process: qualify, solution, proposal, close. And as long as you maintain a meeting, the AE can call it a prospect. So Jason, if you worked for me and it was meeting number 6 with XYZ company, it's still a prospect. But Jason, the second in your courtship, you can't get a follow-up meeting with me, it's no longer a prospect. So all of a sudden now, as an account executive, the suspect quadrant becomes part of an account executive as well, because all of a sudden as an account executive, you've got your base of suspects now as well, but your suspects are everyone you couldn't get a follow-up meeting with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Okay. So every single time we ask in a training, hey, virtual training room or pre-COVID live training room, define a prospect. We would hear every definition under the sun about how a salesperson would define a prospect. And guess what we would never hear, Jason, ever?
Anything about meetings?
Nothing about meetings. And so our classic question, we'd look around the room and say, permission granted to change how this company defines a prospect. Because can you imagine, everybody in this call, can you imagine being a salesperson, being allowed to call an opportunity a prospect, and you don't even know when you're talking to them again? Think about that. And so what ends up happening, and when we go through this with chief revenue officers, we look at a chief revenue officer and we'll say, are you impressed with your ability to give your salespeople the chance to forecast a piece of business and they have no earthly idea when they're talking to somebody again? And do you realize right now your sales team defines a prospect as just an opportunity? And so now that the CRO buys into this, and now that there's now an application of how we define a prospect where we have to have a scheduled meeting, holy moly, Jason, everybody listening, if somebody had in their prospect pre-training with us 20 opportunities, it's probably down to 5 now. And now it's a true pipeline that's forecastable.
Yeah, like I said, I think that's That's every, not only rep, but manager's dream.
Okay. And now we move up to the contracted client. And again, this is somewhat of a pet peeve of mine. I'll ask in our trainings, how many clients do we currently have contracted? And I'll just make up a number and they'll say 67. I'll say, great. Do we have 67 scheduled meetings? Do we know exactly when we're scheduled to speak with every one of our 67 clients? And never once in 20 years of doing training in a training has a client said that they are scheduled with every single client, which just breaks my heart. Everybody knows out of sight, out of mind, right? So now, Jason and everybody, this is where the customer success team comes into play with the help of account management, or excuse me, account executive. But even if this is just a customer success quadrant, and to your point, Jason, earlier, maybe for SDR, BDR, the universe suspect, AEs, it's kind of more prospect suspect, and contracted clients now more customer success or account manager. It's incumbent upon as a company in customer success, when are we meeting again? If we don't have a meeting, then theoretically, for customer, that's customer success definition of a suspect. Get it?
Makes sense.
Okay. So again, in summary, universe, pre-qualified opportunities that are basically bubbling. Right now, you're not working. They're in there. They're in a jar. We call it the cookie jar. They're sitting in a jar. Right now, you're not working them because right now you're working your suspect, your prospect, your right? Then at any moment, you might decide, I got to start working and I got to start bringing somebody up from the universe up to a suspect because I got to start getting some meetings. Okay. So suspect simply means I don't have a meeting. I'm just trying to get one, whether it's a net new meeting, a follow-up meeting, or a follow-up meeting with a contracted client. A prospect is we have a scheduled meeting. It's in the books. And that meeting can be with somebody we're not doing business with, or that meeting can be with a current client, but it's a prospect. And we'd want to put that a current client if we have a chance to upsell or renew, right? And a contracted client, when's the next meeting?
Hey, Stephen, are there any general ratios you should try and aim for between these?
Again, it's totally customized. Think about, Jason, if we had an enterprise seller on this call, and if we had a mid-market seller on this call, how violently different those ratios would be. And so now, one ratio we have to have, and that every seller has to come up with, is their suspect. So again, key difference between prospect and suspect is prospect, you have meetings. And because you have meetings and you know where you are in the courtship and the sales courtship of the meetings, you can now forecast. And suspects, you're trying to get meetings. So the big question we get asked, Jason, and it's similar to the one you just asked, which is, okay, Stephen, it looks to me that the reason you call the suspect quadrant the wild card quadrant is because if I, as a seller, don't understand how many suspects I need to be working at any given time, and again, whether that's SDR, BDR, or whether that's an account executive that also has to do outreach, because I'm sure we have different folks on the call, you have to understand what we call your velocity of outreach. And if you, as an SDR or BDR, or an account executive that's responsible for outreach, if you don't know this metric, you are going to a gunfight with a knife as it relates to you being able to achieve your quota or hopefully get over your quota, because you could be the best SDR, BDR on planet Earth, the best salesperson on planet Earth. You made one classic error, which is you didn't know what your metrics were. Okay. So let's get into that. Let's explain that really quick. All right. And I'm just going to use small numbers to make my point. All right. So you're a salesperson and you have a quota of $100. Right. And you want to overachieve that. I'd like to think that most salespeople on this call more than likely have escalators and kickers in their compensation plan. And you want to get over that so you can reach that. So let's just use, you want to make $120 so you can get 20% over your quota. Right? Where am I against that quota? $40. Meaning you've got $80 left to reach your over quota 120. Right? How long do I have to reach it? And again, just in this example, let's just say 5 months. Right? So I'm just going to stop there. And my belief is every solitary salesperson on this call can come up with these metrics. And I'm sure you have these right in front of you. Okay. Now it gets interesting. Okay. What's my average deal size? In this case, $5. Again, I'd like to assume everybody in this call knows what their average deal size is. In worst case, could ask someone in their sales operations team and or do some due diligence on their own and figure it out. Okay, but again, in this sample overview, $5. Okay, how many deals do I need to close to reach my quota? I need 16 deals. Right? What's my close rate? You'd be shocked, Jason. You would be shocked how many salespeople we ask this question to that don't even know the answer.
I'd probably be less shocked than you think.
Okay. In this sample overview, let's just go with 20%, the kind of standard, number that most people apply. So what does this all mean? It means we have 80 prospects. Remember, how do we define a prospect, everyone? It means we started the courtship. We, at a minimum, got that first meeting either on our own or with the help of an SDR, BDR. But at some point in my sales pipeline quadrants, we called them a prospect. So I need 80 of those to get to my 16. I have a 20% close rate to get to my 16. Okay. It's amazing when we walk through this in our trainings, everybody's like, don't even know my velocity of outreach, right? So what's my suspect outreach close rate to get an intro meeting? So again, SDR, BDRs, or AEs that have to do outreach. Let's just apply the same close rate. For every 10 outreach, for every 10 suspects that I try to work, we get 2 meetings. Again, think of the sales pipeline quadrants. Top right, suspect quadrant. I'm trying to get a meeting. SDR, BDR, or AE doing it on their own. Every 10 I try, I get 2. Okay. So what does that mean? It means we have to have 400 initial outreaches, because 400 initial outreaches at a 20% close rate gets us those 80 meetings we're desperate for, or we're at risk of not making 120% of our number. So what does that mean? It means 80 per month, 20 per week, 5 per day. So Jason, if this was you as a salesperson, you could sleep at night knowing that every single day you have to do a minimum of 5 suspect outreaches. And if you're not doing a minimum of 5, Jason, you would then go to your boss and say, hey boss, I just want to let you know, I only did 3 outreach today. So I'm at risk of not making it. I just wanted to let you know that, because that's what the metrics tell us. You have to be, and if you're a salesperson, you don't know your velocity of outreach, you are at risk, major risk of not making your number. Okay, so
I assume you can break this down into, even further into different outreach channels. So, that means, X number of emails, X number of calls, X number of LinkedIn. You can break it out into individual activities, I assume.
Well, that's here. Now what you're talking about, Jason, it's a great question, by the way. Now you're talking about, okay, boy, if Stephen P was doing this training, continuing on, the next thing I'd want to know is, okay, Stephen, I've got my sales pipeline quadrants done. Awesome. I just did all this metrics. I did the reverse engineer metrics, and I've got my 5 per day. Okay, Stephen, I now want to start doing my outreach. So how do you do that? And everybody's got a different definition, a different spin on this, Jason. But I think your question also had sort of the answer in that, which is a multi-touch, right? Specific outreach cadence that you that you implement. Okay. Now, I can assure you there's one particular outreach cadence. There's one particular thing you could do in outreach. Again, if you're an SDR, BDR, this is like your gold. This is like your little secret sauce. If you're an account executive that's also required to do outreach, ditto, secret sauce. Jason, want to venture a guess on what the secret sauce is on when you do these outreaches, on where you could really score big and maybe radically change this percentage and move this more like to 50% or greater?
Something like pre-call research, qualification, something along those lines.
Very popular answer, and so ready for it, everybody. If you're taking notes, 1, 2, the referrals.
Yes.
So when you think about the sales pipeline quadrants, remember, one of the things you have to do is prioritize that universe. And what always races to the universe, at least what I teach, is when you score a referral, when an SDR, BDR scores a referral from somebody that they did outreach to, that gave them a meeting, classic SDR, BDR best practice. You scored a meeting with fake name John. So now John moves to a prospect and it goes over to the AE. But SDR, BDR ask John for referrals. Just chase the referrals. It's like stealing.
Yeah.
Right? And so all of a sudden, because you now implement the referral strategy, now all of a sudden this percentage changes drastically, which in effect drastically changes the rest of these numbers. And so as an enterprise seller, you might only have to do one outreach every 2 weeks. Or mid-market, you might only have to do 2 a day. But your 2 a day have referrals always. One of the things that crushes me, Jason, on LinkedIn and all these threads I'm reaching about cold calling, I just read all these threads. I'm like, why are we still talking about cold? It's 2020 people. Can we stop talking about cold calling and cold emailing and generate a referral? And I'll leave it there because that's the next thing we would get into, Jason, in our training.
Yeah.
Would be how to do outreach, how do you score referrals? And then we have this, I'll tease the listeners, we have this like literally guaranteed follow-up cadence where you're going to get an 80% reply rate on your emails. And people are like, wait a minute, did you just say 80%? Mm-hmm. 80%. So that's my teaser.
All right. And then what do they need to do to get to that?
They need to be surgically organized, implement the sales pipeline quadrants, and get referrals, and do the right follow-up cadence that we teach.
Awesome. All right, cool. We got just a couple of minutes left here. I know we've got at least one question already. Rex is asking, does upsell and renew imply that is a contracted client already? Does that mean the contracted client may drop down to a prospect?
Correct. If there's a scheduled meeting where where the meeting is intended to do some level of upselling and or renewing, it's a prospect. If it's just what we call a patty cake meeting or just a hand-holding meeting, you don't have to put it as a prospect because you're not trying to upsell. I mean, it's a relationship building meeting, which is fine. So if it's an upsell or a renewal and it's a current client, that can be you can also put them as a prospect. And if you're trying to get a meeting with a current client because you think you can upsell and renew, then it would be a suspect. Okay.
Got it. All right. If anybody has any other questions, drop that in. I've got one for you, Stephen.
Please.
While we wait, if you had to say one thing that is of course we've spent all this time doing the quantitative side of it, but if you have one tip, one recommendation on the qualitative side of how to execute on this and do it well, what would that one tip be?
Well, I would say just reverse engineer it, and start with the universe and make sure your universe. Look at Jason and everybody. Garbage in, garbage out. Right? If your universe stinks, the whole system is all for naught. Right?
Yep.
you've got to pre-qualify your opportunities and make sure your universe is robust with good opportunities, and you got to continue to fill that beast, if you will. And then just make sure that make sure then you know what number of suspects you should be working at any given time. Those are the two biggest things to initiate this, because the rest of it will fall right into place.
Great. All right, we got one more and then we'll wrap it up. Matthew's asking regarding outdated focus on cold calls, emails. What's the best way to communicate internally to a team that's still focused on those practices?
Well, I think the question is just which tool, like what's the order of the chaos relative to the tools? But Jason, when you said internal, that might be where is this just for outreach? Like what tools should you use for outreach?
No, they're asking, what's the best way to try and convince your own team to move away from those sort of spray and pray, cold email, cold calling practices?
It's simple. Teach them how to build their referral channels. So you have to have referral channels, i.e., all your current clients are referral channels. Let me go back to the 67 current clients, using that as and geez, I asked the sales team, how many contacts per each client do we have a relationship with? Oh, 5. Well, right there, those are 300 plus individuals that we have a relationship with that we're contracted. So let's just go ask all 367 for them for referrals. I've had clients, Jason, just do that for 6 months, just that initiative alone, and drive millions upon millions upon millions of revenue just because they went back to their current clients and asked for referrals. It's like, oh, how did I not think of that? Right? And then you've got your no's, people that gave you a no, that's a referral channel. You've got other different departments that might be influences that are channel. You can go to your C-level executives and they might punt you down to a mid-level person. That's a channel. LinkedIn's a channel. So going to an event, now virtual events, going to events is a channel. You have to have your referral channels and you have to execute on those. Does that make sense?
Yep, makes sense. We have one last one. Rex was asking for the velocity example, the percentages. He was asking were those real world. I assume they were not based on reality, but they were also made up figures, right?
Oh, 100% made up. And so as a salesperson, challenge yourself that if there are any of those numbers you didn't know, which is okay. By the way, if you didn't know them, you'd be right where every other seller is. I've never met a seller that knew all those numbers. What you should take pride in though is take the next month or 2 or 3 months, keep inventory. And so maybe 2 months from now you can go, okay, now I know what those percentages are.
Great. All right, guys. Well, we're a few minutes over. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been fantastic. Like I said, we recorded today's webinar. We'll send out an email with a link to the recording as well as the deck sometime tomorrow. And then if you've got additional questions for myself or Stephen, please don't hesitate to reply to that email. We're happy to route you wherever you need to go. And thanks everybody for joining us today. Stephen.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.